I am going to disagree with what I've heard. I only came on this freeway at noontime. So Jeff spoke about disruptive education, disruptive technology. I'm going to speak about it in a different way. And I think I'm also going to disagree with our previous speaker. But let me tell you, disruptive technology comes from the idea of a business guy, Clayton Christensen. And Clayton Christensen is coming March 29th, and I am responsible for the Pullius Lecture in higher education. So be sure to show up to SC and you can hear the real guy. But here's the deal. Look at the title up there. Up until last week, I was the director of the Center for Higher Education Policy Analysis. I am now director of the Pullius Center for Higher Education, and that's because I spent lots of time with the Pullius family, and when Calvin Pullius passed away, he left $5 million to me to endow the center. Now, when I was a graduate student at Stanford, if you had said to me that I was going to speak with old people about endowing things, even my faculty at Stanford would never have thought of that in a million years. Why I got into higher education was I loved to write and I loved to teach. So this thought about that would be part of my responsibilities, never thought of it in a million years. And really what I am concerned about is access and equity. I'm concerned about how do we get more low-income youth into post-secondary education. So one of the things that we have in my center is we work with 10 low-income schools, some of them dropout factories, and try to help kids apply to four-year institutions. Now, the teacher or the counselor to student ratio in California schools is about 800 students to one college counselor. Now, nationally, it's about 400. The numbers that it should be is about 300. And I don't know about you, but I can remember about the middle upper class school that I went to, and sophomore year, my mom and dad were talking to Mr. Wildman about where, not if, where I was going to college. I don't see that changing. It should, but I don't see it changing. Given that, a few years ago, I spoke with our then provost, now president, and he gave me some money. And I said, I want to create a game. I don't know anything about technology. Thank God you're here. But we have a game innovation lab in the School of Cinema at USC. And the provost said, Bill, you don't know anything about technology. I will give you some money, but you have to work with the game innovation lab. I'm the content, they're the platform. Next month, we will have a game that will go on Facebook that's free to everybody, that will help kids in high school apply to college. Why do I tell you that? Because in the last 4 years, I have raised money from the Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, other foundations, but that's part of my work. But I've also talked to venture capitalists. 10 years ago, I didn't even know what that meant. And it is certainly true, when they talk to me, they're often like this, well, Professor, I don't think so. But I see the world changing significantly. When I was an undergraduate, I went to Tufts University. I majored in English. It was the time in the 70s when there were no requirements. I took lots of language classes. The question of what is education, when I was a kid, it was loving reading. And we can argue about that, but in this day and age, can we also not agree that for the vast majority of students, at the baseline, it has to deal with the jobs in the economy. There are other things, but it has to deal with jobs. I'm doing a study right now looking at cosmetology, and if you were thinking of a second profession, cosmetology is a growth industry. That's not always true. But here's one other fact, and that is that I'm in a school of education at USC, and we have created an online MAT, Masters of Arts in Teaching. We are the content, and there's a for-profit company, not a college or university, a company. And they are the provider. When the dean talked to me about this, I said, There's not a snowball's chance in hell that this is going to work. Why? Think about it. There's a halo effect, I assume, that someone will come to USC to get a Master's of Arts in Teaching if you're going to work in Southern California. It's possible. And that's what a lot of the students who came for our seats did. But why would someone in Georgia pay $40,000 for an online MAT? They could just go to Georgia State, the University of Georgia. The cost, and there is no halo effect in Georgia. Well, I have an MAT from USC. Well, big deal. Shows what I know. We have 2,000 students in 44 states and a couple of countries. So I think in terms of what Jeff was speaking about, some things are changing, but that's different than disruption. So let me get through what I think of there. What is the situation? My graduate student put this together for me. And here's how I see the situation. I agree with President Obama. I agree that we need more students participating in the post-secondary sector. And let's recognize that when we are speaking about more students participating in the post-secondary sector, it's not the kids who are coming from Beverly Hills 90210. It's the schools that I'm working in right now, where the participation rates are extremely low, and working adults. Now, if that is true, this is what we've got right now. What that means to me is that we need roughly 100,000 students a year more every year for the next decade in California. Not nationally, in California. How are we going to do that? I don't know. Now, what I did here was I looked on the left hand, and again, you can look at these later at your leisure, but what I did was I said, okay, here's the numbers that exist if we keep things the same in 2020 to meet Obama's goal. And again, think how critical it is. If you agree with the President and many studies that we need to increase post-secondary participation, think how critical it is that California meets its goal. I have nothing against Vermont, but I mean if Vermont doesn't meet its goal, it's Vermont. But if California doesn't, we got a problem. So how are we going to put all these new students in our different institutions? And again, I don't know if this was mentioned this morning, but look in the LA Times, if we're still reading paper, that look at the problems the community college system has with its latest budget cuts. Think about what does that mean in terms of the ability of students in the UC or the CSU taking community college classes this summer. And it means basically that that will not happen. So how are we going to do this? Now, I do want to say that there are two arguments that will disagree with me. There are, and it's sort of how different the world is. That's either Marx or capitalism. That there are two arguments that say, actually, we don't need more people participating in post-secondary education. In this country, the Marxist argument is less significant. It's more that there's a credentialing going on, and all we're doing is we're making more people jump through hoops, but it's not necessary. That's a bastardized version, but that's a Marxist version. The argument that I think that will become much more compelling, not because it's right, but because the conservatives are so good at making arguments, is that we really don't need more people participating in the post-secondary sector. Really what we've got is enough now. And you'll see this from the economist Richard Vader. You'll see it from the American Enterprise Institute. There's a lot of different arguments right now that are making that case. They'll talk about Domino's pizza delivery guys, and they've got bachelor's degree and they're delivering pizzas. In Los Angeles, every waiter, right, has a bachelor's degree, or he or she wants to be the next Brad Pitt. But that argument needs to be unpacked. Because if we agree with that argument, well, we really don't need more people participating. Who are we talking about with that? Are we saying, okay, we're going to have, from the upper class, there'll be 10% less in the upper class participating, and there'll be 10% less in the middle class participating, and the lower class? Or really will it come that those are the new entrants, those who are the poorest of the poor? We say, well, they don't really need, and I'm not saying a bachelor's degree. I'm saying some form of post-secondary education. And these are all different studies from different think tanks that basically make that point, that we need more people in the post-secondary sector. Now, the fastest growing sector that we see right now is the for-profit sector. And this is true in the country and in California. No one would have guessed a decade ago that they would be 12% of the population, college-going population. I'm not saying it should be, but in terms of disruptive technology and disruptive thinking, this is not thinking outside the box. It's a new box. And I actually think the governor does not have any plan whatsoever about California. Budget cutting is not a plan. So what do we as a citizenry, and what does the governor think is an adequate level of participation in the for-profit sector? Is it 0? Should we drive them out of business? Is it 30%? 40? 50? And I think we have to make a decision about that, a determination. My own sense is I know the problems of for-profits. I know the schlock that exists. But I do not think we can meet the capacity levels that we need without their ethical participation. In Sacramento, we have an office in the Consumer Affairs that's regulating them with 2 people. Come on. Do you really think they're regulating all these for-profit institutions in California with 2 people? But I don't think we can simply say they should go out of business, all of them. Because I don't think we can get where we need to go without them. So what are the problems? Well, we've talked a lot about money, the lack of money. And this is not going to go away. We can also say that there are secondary school problems. Now, let me also give my own take on history and the future. The history of the 20th century is that there was a firewall between K through 12 and higher education in this country. The history of post-secondary education in the 20th century is that institutions tried to be more alike than different. We all wanted to be Harvard. So we went from normal schools to teachers' college to universities. We all wanted to offer master's degrees, doctoral degrees. I think the 21st century we're going to see something extremely different. What we're going to see in the 21st century is a much closer relationship between K through 12 and higher education. And we're going to see sector and institutional differentiation. I think, with the previous speaker, I think that's overblown in terms of the elites. We're talking about 30 institutions. The real risk in the private sector are not so much the elites, it's the ones that are 1 or 2 rungs below. And they're hanging on because, if they lose 50 students, they can't survive. So why are you going to send your child to St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which I know something about, when it could be cheaper to send your son or daughter to University of New Mexico or the University of California or what have you? So the prediction at St. John's for next year is that they are going to have 50 less students. So the president told everyone in the fall that every single employee, including the president, will take a pay cut for next September. Now, I appreciate there are times when we need to take pay cuts or we need to do things like that. But, ultimately you starve yourself to death if you are so tuition-driven. So the real problem to me is not the Harvard, Stanfords, USCs of the world. It's those middle-tier institutions which are trying to charge a higher tuition rate but can't survive. Now, with our high schools, we've got high schools that have, these are dropout factories. Kids who come in the 9th grade and 40% or more will drop out. If we want to do what I'm saying, what the president is saying, we've got to create greater college-going capacity in these type of institutions. We have to have students who are college-ready, and we have to have higher college-going rates. But to me, I think that too often, those of us in higher education take what I think of as a Pontius Pilate approach to things. And we say, whew, those schools, boy, are they bad. I wish, you would send me a better product. I think that's facetious thinking. I think we need to work hand in glove with the schools. And believe me, I know the problems of working with LAUSD because I've had these 10 schools that I've been working with for over a decade now. People come and go. It's a very confusing atmosphere, but I understand the writing problems that these kids got. And I think that the vast majority of these kids want to succeed, but they don't know how to. And we have to be involved. We have to be involved in ways that we haven't been recently. Now, what are some post-secondary problems that we've got in terms of completion rates? And transfer is a big issue. Think of last year what happened. There was a great ballyhoo that we created a transfer law legislation in Sacramento between the community colleges and the CSU. Why was that? Why did we not do it with every four-year institution in the state? What's that about? The UC didn't want to get involved with that. And the privates are not involved, and we certainly don't want to have the for-profits involved in this. But does that help the students in terms of creating some type of synthetic transfer process? Because we've got to speed up and we've got to make things more effective and efficient. The application processes, especially to the UC and the privates, are confusing. Students don't know, first-generation students don't know how to apply. And I often say, you got to remember when you're talking about low-income first-generation youth, first in your head has to be, these are 18-year-olds. Any of you who have 18-year-olds know what I'm talking about. So they will do what they think they'll do, but they lead busy lives. They think they do. So we need to orchestrate it in a way that's effective and efficient. The temporal structure, I think, has to change. And it has to change significantly. Why is it that learning takes place over 4 years' time? Can't there be other ways of doing that? I think that one of the things that has struck me at USC is that the most powerful person at the university, the registrar. Because if I think in my class, you know what, really what should happen this week is we should have my PhD class that I'm teaching, I think I should teach them every day at 9 o'clock for 1 hour just this week because this lesson is really intense. And next week, I think we'll go for 1 full day. And I think we could all make a rationale for that. But if we tried that, the registrar would go, are you crazy? Professor Smith's class comes into your class at 9 o'clock. We don't have the room for that. But we're at a point, because of disruptive technology, that is going to be possible. And I would encourage us to resist saying, oh, that's bad. Just the way the newspaper industry has changed, so will we. And the question is, are we going to be active participants in this or not? Course sequencing and duplication is a problem to me. Graduation requirements in terms of credit hours. Right? Really what we're doing is we're using credit hours and me, as Professor Tierney, as the proxy for learning. We're assuming, I must confess that I was sitting in the back there when I arrived and I was reading a student's paper and writing notes all over it. And at the end of the semester, I'll be able to say this is a good student. But isn't there another, or not, isn't there another way of doing that that assures you rather than basically me saying, trust me? And the funding of institutions rather than students is an issue. And then who helps solve the problem? Again, I am troubled that private institutions in this state and every state can receive state funds via Cal Grants, but then we really ask no obligation of the institutions themselves to be involved in things like schools. That we think, well, that's the job of the CSU or the UC or the community colleges. I think that's got to change. If we, the state, are going to give you, private institutions, income, I don't mean it as recruiting tools. I mean it in terms of that there needs to be a closer relationship between K through 12 and higher education for all of us. Now here's what I want to talk about in terms of disruptive solutions, just so that we can be clear. In the jargon, we've got two phrases: sustainable technology and disruptive technology. Telegraph to telephone is one example. I had no idea until I looked in this how rapidly telephones took over. And telegraph went away. But I do know about this. I am old enough to sort of remember a manual typewriter. Not that old, but sort of. I should say also that I have known your new president, your next president, for 25 years. Millie and I have disagreed for 25 years, so don't attribute anything I say today to that. But we were teenagers 25 years ago. And at that time, these new things, computers, were just coming in. Now, the way disruptive technology works, think back to those of you who typed your dissertations on a Smith Corona and an Olivetti. Right? For those who use the manual typewriter, hallelujah, an electric typewriter, it's fast. And remember, we first used to use that white stuff, right? Then we got rid of the white stuff and we got these little pieces of paper. Wow! Right? We were happy. And that's disruptive, that's sustainable technology. The consumer gets an improvement on a product and we are happy. But none of us were saying with regard to sustainable technology, with the electric typewriter, boy, I wish somebody invented a computer. Therefore, Smith Corona and Olivetti didn't deal with them. What you got is you got a clunky technology that a bunch of guys build in a garage. It's expensive. Geeks kind of like it. And it's like, I'll never use that. And the interesting point about disruptive technology that gets made is it happens like that. And that happening results in Smith Corona and Olivetti no longer being around. So the question to me is that what we're talking about with regard to higher education right now? Are we seeing some type of disruptive moment? And again, I want to point out, I am not celebrating this, I'm not saying it's great, but as an analyst, I'm trying to come to grips with what's going on. And the problem or the issue, the thing that is not the precise fit with regard to disruptive technology and higher education, is that the analogy is not precise. We're talking about an online technology and we're talking about for-profit institutions. And in the past, you're more talking like things. Telegraph to typewriter, those sorts of issues. But if you look at it, most often the disruptive technology does not take place in standard traditional institutions. And it doesn't take place because the consumer, the people that we are serving, aren't asking for it. We're trying to meet the needs of the consumer. And those of us who work in traditional institutions don't want it. So you have to go outside and create a new box. It's not thinking of outside the box. So here we go. So where are we headed? And what will happen? Now I think, talk about a ridiculous statement for me to stand up here and say, where are we headed? And, as if you're going to write this down and I'll come back in 10 years. But I honestly don't think we can say that the world is going to stay the same. The higher ed world is going to stay the same. I don't think we're going to see just a few little transformations along the way. So if you reject these, then what do we do? And I am all appreciative of lobbying the government, lobbying especially the state government. If there is a tax proposal put forward this fall, I will vote for it. But I don't think that solves the issues that face us if we are dealing with capacity. And recognize one of the neat things about this country is that we have always been ahead of the educational curve. From Horace Mann in the beginning of the 19th century, when we were not a rich country, saying, I think all children should go to school. From Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, creating land-grant institutions. From the dawn of the 20th century, when every state, when it came into the Union, it had to have compulsory education. The GI Bill. We have always talked about the need for more education for our citizenry as a way up and a way out. So if we believe that, what are we going to do? I think learning will be speeded up. Sometimes I think when I talk with normal people, they say, you do research on this? I mean, like, this is found? One thing we know is that if you don't take classes in the summer, you're going to go through, the phrase is, a summer slump. So, you and I are running, and we run from September until June. We stop, June comes, you go off to the beach, and I continue running. Who's going to be a better runner in September? But when we look at those students, the students that we most need to increase in terms of participation rates, those students go through not just a summer slump, but they also go through a slump dealing with the senior year. My friend up here, from my house, I can see the Hollywood sign, so forgive me. At the beginning of the film industry, Charlie Chaplin did everything. He was the writer, producer, director, and star of his films. That's us. I'm certainly the star, but I am the writer, director, and producer of my classes. I just don't see that holding. I think if I didn't have graduate students, I would still be like handwriting stuff out. I mean, thank God you're here because I am just a Luddite with technology. But I really think that we're going to see differentiation. What are you best at as a faculty member? And certainly and I'm not saying technology is going to take over every single class and all of our classes tomorrow. But I do know that technology could improve my teaching, but I don't know how to do it. I need somebody else to do that. So we're going to see, I think, differentiation in our roles in ways that we hadn't seen in the past. Just the way I started by saying, I never thought that I would be running around at a private university trying to raise money or talking to these people, these venture capitalists, in very different ways. And I fully acknowledge there are issues with that. Issues in terms of technology transfer, intellectual property, all sorts of things that we need to work out. But see, what drives me is trying to increase participation rates of low-income youth nationally, but really I'm in Los Angeles. So if I want to do that, I've got to talk in different ways to different groups of people. And I never thought, I still am an academic, I still write a lot. I have 2 books coming with Harvard Press and Johns Hopkins. But it's just also in terms of, dealing with different kinds of groups and social media. I do absolutely agree that I think for the future for us, we not only not, to use a double negative, we don't want to be defensive, but I think we need to be offensive, and I don't mean that in an obnoxious way. But I think that, right now, I work with someone at USC to write op-eds. CNN, LA Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post. And again, the comments you get on these things, it's horrible. Boy. But I have to be involved. I want us to raise the public dialogue about the future of higher education and the importance of it in terms of reducing poverty. So I really think that faculty will no longer be a proxy for learning. I think we will have things that are tied to outcomes. I think that we can absolutely argue, and we should argue about, let's just say, critical thinking, what that means. But this whole argument about gainful employment, that is not going away. So are we providing the skills necessary for people to take positions in the economy? We look in California, we have a critical need for students to take fields in science, technology, engineering, and math in 10 years from now. And we're not going to meet that need. So what do? I think college needs to start sooner. For those of you who have seniors, or really the second semester of senior year, really the only thing that's going on is who you're going to take to the prom and not much else. And if you look in the low-income schools, what happens after November 1st when applications are due? Not too much. I have a writing program as well because I want to get kids ready for college. And they have to do three things. They have to get a counselor's letter of reference. They have to say that they're going to a four-year institution, and these are four-year institutions all over America. It could be Cal State Fullerton, it could be Dartmouth, it could be UCLA. This really has nothing to do with me trying to recruit for SC. But the third thing they need to do is they need to give me one 5-page paper they have written in 4 years. Can't do it because they don't write when they're in high school. Again, this is like when I talk to people and I say, if you want to write, you should write. Well, if it's not happening, we need to make it happen. So how can we do that? And how can we use technology to make it happen? How can we have a closer alliance with K through 12? I think that it's strange to me, if you came up at the end here and said to me, yeah, my son is in 10th grade. And I said, oh, how's it going? He said, pretty well, but he's really nervous. He's applying to 11th. Right? We would go, what's that about? Unless you're going to some totally different school, what's that about? So why are we having students who are qualified apply to 13th grade? I never thought about it, right? Upper middle class family, 2 older brothers, went to college. It's a natural. But for students who are first-generation low-income kids, they don't know what it's about. Somebody said to me once, I work with a student as well, and a student said to me once, I said, where do you want to go? And she said, I've thought about it, and I want to go, I've narrowed it down to 3 places. LA Trade Tech, Cal State LA, or Berkeley. Really? Okay, why is that? And she said, well, my teacher went to Berkeley, and he said it's a good school, and I'm really into soccer, and I looked at Berkeley, and they got a soccer team. And Cal State LA, my brother goes to, and they got a soccer team, and so does LA Trade Tech. That student was making a very rational decision. But really what we need to do is have a closer synthesis between 11th, 12th, 13th grade rather than this divide. Transfers have to be synthetic, and I really do think that blended learning is the thing of the future. It's hard I love teaching my classes. I have a traditional, I'm working on it now for next fall. I've got a PhD class in the fall, extremely bright students, hardworking. A third of them are students of color, and we meet talk big ideas, read lots of things. I have a reader. But I just think in the future, that's going away for all of us. And it's those guys are the ones who are telling me, right? Just the way 15 years ago, a graduate student, my handwriting is horrible. So I always would type out lots and lots and lots of comments. And I'm sure all of you do now. I never use paper. And a graduate student 15 years ago said, there's this thing called attachments, and you can embed comments. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he said, you don't want to be out of it. And I went, I didn't want to be out of it. And it's actually improved my comments. So here's some things that is where I see, 5, 10, 20 years from now. Students begin college in January of their senior year. How do we fund that? We have to create a new funding model to make it happen. But how do we ensure that these sorts of things are happening? Or are we going to be with the status quo? Let's hold on until the economy gets better, and then funding levels will return. That's one possibility. I don't think that's going to happen. If we look at organizational theory, what we see is the best way to make things happen is not by sanction. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. It's by incentive. You don't have to do it, but if you do this, this will happen. Is it possible that we can provide different incentives that make this happen? Community college, the transfer rates from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions nationally is abysmal. Most recently, my friends and colleagues at UCLA last week came out with reports talking about the abysmal transfer rates, especially for low-income, first-generation students of color. Part of the reason is that they've got so many differentiated functions going on. So let's clarify what's what. One of the reasons that good for-profits work well is that they're very clear about what they do. When I've talked to the guy who runs the cosmetology school that I'm looking at, that's what they do. They do cosmetology. They don't do other things. If we were to ask him, what is the point of education? He would say, for my students, it's to get them a successful job in cosmetology. And I think, again, that may not be the same statement that you at Cal State Fullerton would say, but as citizens, we want to be concerned about this. The UC, I think that the UC, one of the problems right now in California is that we are cutting budgets, but we are not talking about the research capacity of the state. I am a researcher. I tend to think that research is important. But do we need every UC research university that we've got now? UC Merced cost $500 million, and it took about 20 years from the first day that it was discussed until it opened. It's got about 5,000 students. Now, when I said this a couple months ago, and there were some legislators and folks from UC, they said, yeah, but the economic development in Merced was incredibly important. Okay, but that's a different issue. If you're talking about we have capacity constraints in the state, would any of us really say, well, really what we should do is we should spend another $500 million over the next 20 years so that we can open a campus with 5,000 students? I don't think so. And they're half done. They want another $500 million. Right? Think of those numbers that I gave to you at the start. That's the challenge for me. I think that distribution requirements, the schmear of classes that I had that I loved when I was an undergraduate is going to go away. I think things are going to be much more stripped down and confined, and we're going to move forward so that a student knows what he or she is doing in a finite period of time. I used to teach before I was at USC at Penn State. Penn State created an online campus. Not the most successful initiative. This was about 10 years ago. But one of the interesting things that happened is they tried to make a stark differentiation. If you're in state college, a traditional student, you're taking seat classes. So you can't register for the online classes. And the kids who were taking the seat classes said, why? If I'm getting A's in the seat class, why can't I take an online class? And if I get an A in that and it's legitimate, what's the deal here? Because students are different from us. They're thinking in a much faster way. Look at how social media functions right now. And I just see this overtaking us if we don't deal with it. I think that we need, about a year or two ago, I wrote an op-ed for the LA Times, and I said there needed to be a new master plan. I actually think the master plan's dead. I think that to tinker around the edges with it, I don't think so. And it seems such an odd, there's no coordination in this state. UC does what they want to do, USC does what they want to do. I really think we need a new compact, and it's the 5 sectors. It's the UC, the CSU, the community colleges, the private nonprofits, and the private for-profits. And again, I understand the concern about the for-profits. But if you agree with the gist here, I don't think we can simply wait for the storm to abate. We certainly cannot let the for-profits just run around doing whatever they want. But I don't think we can succeed without them. And if we can regulate them and bring them to the table, I think that's all to the good. It's good for them and it's good for us. We have something to learn from them. Not, everything, but something. They have something to learn from us as well. I spoke at a for-profit conference, a couple months ago, and this guy came up to me at the break and he said to me, we're learning at our institution that if you engage students out of class, that's really a good thing. And I was like, really? Well, there's like a literature of about 50 years on that. And really? Okay, so we need to deal with it. I just don't think this. I don't think that if we get more revenue, if this tax increase comes next fall, I don't think that will solve our problems. It may reduce the anxiety that we face, but in terms of increasing capacity rates, I don't see it happening. I also don't see us building 13 new campuses, which is what I estimate we'd need to do if we go back to that initial slide and we're acting in a normal way. I just don't see it. So what do we do? Now, let me end with something that I would recommend if it's still open. And that is, Sunday night in Culver City, my partner and I saw Raisin in the Sun. Excellent. Excellent play. Lorraine Hasbury, in the 1950s, wrote this play. She was the first African-American woman to ever have a play of hers staged on Broadway. Quite remarkable. It deals with racism, and it deals with poverty. And at the end of Act 1, the father, Walter, thinks he's going to get some money. And he talks to his 7-year-old son, Travis. And he's talking about what's going to happen 10 years from now when you're 17. And he says, I'll pull the car up on the driveway, just a plain black Chrysler, I think with white walls. No, black tires, more elegant. Rich people don't have to be flashy. Though I'll have to get something a little more flashy for your mother. Maybe a Cadillac convertible to do her shopping in. And I'll go inside the house and your mom will come downstairs and meet me at the door and we'll kiss each other. And she'll take my arm and we'll go up to your room to see you sitting on the floor with the catalogs of all the great universities in the country. No, all the great universities in the world. And I'll say, all right, son, it's your 17th birthday. What is it you've decided? Just tell me you want to go to school, and you'll go. Just tell me what you want to be, and you'll be it. Whatever you want, yes, sirree. Now, he doesn't get the money, but it's a happy ending or a significant ending. But really, that's something that has been in this country at least for half a century, but really all of our. And we've always met problems, not by saying we're going to hunker down, but we're going to move forward. And the question to me is, how do we move forward deliberatively, determinatively, and meet the problems that face us? Right now, I don't think we're doing that. So let me stop here. Let's have some questions, disagreements. My graduate students always disagree with me, so have at it.
Questions for Professor Tierney?
Late in the day. One right there.
Thank you for your stimulating lecture or discussion. The question I have is that in talking with legislators and students, you talked about an integrated system with the community, everybody working together. But in justifying 1440 and some of the other transfer legislation, it seems like what legislators and the public want is for a student to start anywhere and decide that they want to go somewhere else and be able to pick up right where they left off. They want all the parts to be interchangeable. So does that mean that all of higher education is the same? I mean, is that how you see, because you didn't talk about being completely interchangeable parts, which is what it seems like the students and the legislators want to see happen.
National University is a nonprofit, private nonprofit institution, and it has campuses or locations up and down the state. It's an interesting model to look at. And to answer your question with an alternative example, the problem National has to do is when they want community college students, they want to grow, and again, they are a nonprofit institution, a private nonprofit. They have to create agreement with every single community college where they are. And they run up and down the state, from the north to down to San Diego. That's what we got to get against. That's the problem we need to solve. Is it an issue that there's some student who takes a community college class at LA Trade Tech, comes here for a semester, and then moves to San Francisco? Absolutely. But we can solve that. First, we have to recognize, however, that rather than creating barriers to institutions, the transfer is much more synthetic. I did a study last year when I talked with private institutions like National. Because there is no dialogue and there is a disincentive to create transfer policies, these institutions would say to me that it takes the student at least a semester longer to graduate. And they're not trying to grab money. That's the faculty and the administration not talking with the faculty and administration at the community college. The University of San Diego is a good example. And they said, you know, if we can have a quicker flow. Okay. If we can have a quicker flow through model, students will get through rather than. Is that an issue? Absolutely. In another life, I have spent a lot of time looking at Native American students. And of all of our students in the system, those who are most mobile are Native American students. They start out on the reservation, they go to the local city, they move back to the reservation, they may go to Los Angeles. It's a patchwork quilt. Those to me are anomalies. Those are problems that don't say we can't do it. We have to figure out how to make it happen. Okay.
Okay. Hello?
In my naive and ideal world, I see it inevitable that technology will marry with that would mean information is readily accessible and grading structures change. I guess that might transform the traditional role that faculty will play.
Yes.
Have you made an assessment on how that could transform?
I think it's going to change dramatically. And I think, you know, it is true, based on the research, that all institutions, except community colleges, reward faculty for doing research rather than teaching. So when we gave raises in some systems, it's not that, you know, the faculty member at Fullerton would write or publish as much as somebody at UCLA or USC. But if you look at the faculty member in Office A and the faculty member in Office B, the reward structure is geared towards research rather than teaching. Now, you know, in talks other than this, I often will say, and my graduate students are most surprised at this, that faculty are not stupid. We respond to incentives. We are in charge of the tenure system for those of us who are tenured. There's nothing saying that we couldn't change the reward structure and reward people for X rather than Y. But again, I really take seriously the thought that in the 20th century, the way we did things was we all tried to reward things the way Harvard rewards things because we want to be Harvard. I think that's a mistaken idea. And I think, again, you know, another part of me is I'm a member of the UP, I've been in the governance committee, I am very involved in campus governance at USC. I take the idea of tenure and academic freedom very seriously. I do not think we should get rid of the tenure system. But I also don't think that it is written in stone that it cannot change how we define what we do and how we reward what we do.
You know, you have painted a fascinating future for a number of different changes. And I'm wondering what scenario you have in mind and how these changes are actually going to take place. Knowing what you know about how difficult it is to make a change in higher education and in the political decision making, especially in California. I wish all of these things would happen magically, but they won't. What is your scenario of how at least some of these things could be accomplished?
I know. I wish I had an answer. I think the sludge in the system, the glue in the system right now, means that we cannot look to Sacramento, in my own mind. We cannot look to Sacramento for the solution. The solution, however, really lies with us. And here's my concern. My concern is that in virtually all systems right now, we've got boards, administration, and faculty who are kind of angry at one another. You know, you guys did this, or you guys are getting this money and we're not, and all these things. I understand that. But if the governor came out this afternoon and said, hallelujah, I found the money, end of budget crisis, I think the boards, the administration, and the faculty would go, hallelujah. And we would go back to the norm. Given the charts that I got at the front there and my concern about increasing access and increasing participation rates, that won't do it. That means that I think ideas like this, like having a group of faculty, administrators, others, talking about these things in a deliberative way is the way forward. But I like to be an optimist. But especially in California right now, I see very cloudy skies. You know, earlier this year I was in Utah. Utah has put forward and Utah's not Arizona, but I mean, Utah, however, has put forward a plan for participation rates and has talked with, you know, the meeting they had was with K through 12 and higher education. And It was, how do we make these processes work? And that was, again, the good news, bad news was, that was at the instigation of the governor in a Republican state, but it was with the active participation of all these different parties. And this is also a state, by the way, if you've been tracking things, that had a bill in the legislature to eliminate tenure. If that had happened, everything would have stopped, and the bill got pulled. But so there are things happening in some states. What's amazing to me is how fast things can change. You know, when a thoughtful governor in Ohio goes away and a new governor comes in and says, I don't want to do what they had.
And with that, I'm the keeper of the clock, and join me in thanking Professor Tierney.
Oops. Sure.